Welcome to the Freedom Founder Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Duggar. Now, the average COO is somewhere between 45 plus, 45 to 55, somewhere in that range. But there are those that are younger. And my guest today was a CEO by the age of 24, but she had a history of working much younger than that. So we're going to get right into the conversation today. Victoria Peltier, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. And I'm
Thanks
looking
for
forward
having
to this
me.
conversation.
That's great.
Um, Now, with regards to your experience getting to being a COO at 24, I want to step back to when did you start working and when did you first get into an entrepreneurship type role before getting to that point that you're a COO?
So, thanks, Zach. I'm happy to be here and share some of the nuggets that I've learned over the years and a little bit about
Yeah.
my history. I I started working at 11 actually in a hair salon doing everything except hair.
Okay.
So I started from there, and then I became assistant manager of the shoe store I worked at when I was 14 in high school. And continued to work all the way through university and got promoted and
Yeah.
recruited directly out of actually, I worked for a bank for a
Okay.
number of years throughout university to become COO.
Yeah.
The entrepreneurial starts. Well, I'm a big corporate girl. I work for large Fortune 500
Yep.
companies running markets or businesses, but I have always had the proverbial side hustle. I've both
Yeah.
built and bought businesses. And the first one was I was 19 or 20 and I
Yep.
acquired the casting agency that represented me. I was an actor when I was younger. So that
Okay.
was the first sort of foray into it. And then ever since, some have been passion projects that I've grown, and others have been
Yeah.
acquisition companies.
Okay. So you had your start in the area of employment and working at quite a young age for most people at 11. They're not in any type of a working role, let alone are they even thinking about it really. How did you end up doing some work at 11? Did you know the owner of the salon or how did that work out?
I come from like really, really humble beginnings,
Yeah.
and I never had to worry about food or clothing, but that
Hmm.
was the extent of it. There was not much else, no school trips for me,
Yeah.
no vacations for the family. So I started working just to buy the things that my parents couldn't
Sure.
afford that my friends seemed to have. The hair salon was actually where my mom and I went. And so we just got
Okay.
to know the owners there. And, I talked about I think I'd started babysitting and they needed some help. And by the way, I'm 5'8" or so, which is not exceptionally tall, but for a woman, it's taller. And
Sure.
I'd already hit
Yeah.
this height by the time I was like 10 or 11 years old. So I've always
Okay.
looked much older than I was. Although
Yep.
don't say I look older than I am now, but I did when I was young. That's how
Yeah.
that first role came to be.
Okay. Well, that's an excellent start, and it makes sense then that you were kind of interested to get some things that at the time your family weren't able to afford. All the basic needs absolutely were met, but you also saw this as an opportunity to get some of the things that you wanted beyond those as well. And it started that initiative and that work ethic at a very young age, so that you could continue that as I believe you also graduated college earlier than what others typically do, if I'm not mistaken on that as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'd
Okay.
skipped a couple of years, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then you got into a place where you were also working in a corporate environment. And when we talked before in the conversation, you had mentioned, what are you doing? You're doing something during your 9 to 5, but what you're doing with your 5 to 9? And that's something I hadn't really ever heard before, but it really does make sense for someone who is engaged in, as you put it, a proverbial side hustle. Continuing to find new opportunities to engage in your time. Um, so, in regards to that statement, is that something that you just kind of had that internal motivation to engage in additional activity outside of your 9 to 5 role?
Yeah, absolutely, and it comes from the fact that I started working
Hmm.
and I was in school, and school was
Yeah.
my job until I graduated,
Okay.
and I've always had like multiple, whether even in school, part-time jobs, et cetera, and so it comes from that. It
Yeah.
comes from, I have this, beyond the saying, there's your 9 to 5 and then 5 to 9. This other
Yeah.
saying, it's where there's conviction, there's capacity. And so I hate
Okay.
when people say, "Oh, there's no time to get it done." And I get it. Like, you have to put food on the, table and supply, provide for your family. But if you have this passion project, or you want to start a small business, so
Yeah.
doing it. So for me, I'm exceptionally disciplined. And
Hmm.
so I bought my first house at 19. So although, I was doing some acting on the side. Yes, I bought the
Yeah.
casting agency, but I realized that wasn't necessarily going to, pay my mortgage. And
Sure.
so I
Right.
needed to continue to look and do new and different things. And so I spend a lot of time coaching, people now to think
Yeah.
much differently and recognize that there's different ways to use their time. And for those who want to become entrepreneurs, you can, but they don't doesn't turn necessarily into money overnight. So again, figure out ways to do it, while maintaining the day job, and then it can grow from there, or not. Quite honestly, I enjoy the
Yeah.
corporate world, and I've built and bought businesses while doing that. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily want it to be my full time.
Right. Right. Okay. So for some, they might get to that point where they are in a corporate role, and that's great. That's where they are at. But I hear from you that that felt more like you're already doing that. You're already working as you're going to school, so you're already doing school as your job, and then you were working. So to add in a different type of role once you had a corporate role in your 9 to 5 just made sense. So it sounds like it was part of that pattern. Now, for others, they do get that question of, well, I don't know how to fit in that time, or how could I even do that? Because on top of these things, you have been on multiple boards, you've been a keynote speaker, and these are things that you're also continuing to do. I've been an author, and you mentioned businesses. So, talk a little bit about that discipline and how do you structure your time so that you are able to accomplish these things and not blow up, not get to that point where you're feeling overwhelmed or way too stretched that you cannot be successful in any aspect.
Yeah, I've gotten very good at creating boundaries for myself.
Okay.
And I hate when people say, how do you do it all? It's all just life
Sure.
for me. I'm also a
Yep.
wife and I'm a mother. I'm a fitness
Yep.
fanatic. I used to coach kids sporting events, right? So doing it
Yeah.
all. And so that means, one, I'm often doing multiple things at one time.
Hmm.
Although as I now get a little bit older, I'm not quite as adept at it,
Okay.
at the multitasking.
Hmm.
Um, but for me, the boundary creation has been recognition of things that don't bring me personal or professional joy or value,
Okay.
and by me, I mean by extension, my family. Then I either say no to doing
Yeah.
them, or for the things that still might need to be done but are not as high on the value chain, I learn to
Hmm.
delegate or outsource.
Okay.
So that's how I've been able to, do a lot.
Hmm.
And I'm also exceptionally, I said earlier, disciplined. So
Yeah.
sadly, I mean, I live by my calendar. By these
Yeah.
15 or 30-minute increments, just to block time, even for me to respond to emails. So I'm not doing it all at night, or if
Yeah.
I'm on commitment for a new article that I have to write. Same thing. So just making time and space for that. And then there's
Yes.
choices. So that 5 to 9, some people choose to fill it with watching Netflix. Uh,
Hmm.
but for me,
Yeah.
there's time spent, working or doing
Mhm.
other things that I need to get done.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a spouse and as a mother, you also have different parts of your life that you have to fill with family time as well. And so you establish that, sounds like, through balancing and through blocking out time so that you're intentional about the use of your time rather than just turning on the TV, changing it to that another Netflix show that's on your list to complete, but rather you make intentional use of your time, which probably does include sometimes watching shows on Netflix. It's just
It does.
not mindlessly uh, all hours during that 5 to 9. Okay. Now the term unstoppable. So we titled this episode "Unstoppable in Life and Business." I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that means to you and how that has become a mantra in your life.
Yeah, it really is sort of this philosophy and mantra for me. I sign off a
Uh-huh.
majority of my social media posts with unstoppable.
Okay.
And it's a result of many things, but early on, I experienced a significant amount of trauma. I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was really, really abusive to me. I was
Hmm.
adopted out of that situation, so I'm fortunate in that regards. But that those early years, I think, actually informed um, in my DNA. I think to be, I'm fight or flight. I'm a fighter for sure.
Sure.
So I do think when we talk about like resilience and being unstoppable, the ability to overcome significant adversity or challenge, there's a bit of my DNA. I think I'm
Yeah.
just born that way, but I've also learned to build a muscle around that.
Yeah.
Learning how to be incredibly self-aware, how to process the things when they come through, be really self-reflective, and then model the actions or the thinking, language, behavior that I want to see. And so for
Hmm.
me, I've taken those early years, which is where my why and where it stems from, into
Yeah.
every scenario from a workplace standpoint. 18 mergers and acquisitions I've been a part of, like that in
Oh,
itself,
wow.
great significant challenge.
Yeah. Right.
And so, I've learned how to, develop this healthier level of resilience, to
Hmm.
which means just not compartmentalizing it, not dealing with things, but being really focused on the goal or objective that I have, and like one foot in front of the other. That means
Yeah.
progress towards the end state.
Right, right, and I like how you related that to muscle, to that resilience and becoming unstoppable in life and business, and relating it to muscle because it doesn't just happen that you are resilient or that you are unstoppable. These types of things do take time and effort and experience and going through some challenges to continue to grow that muscle. Some things that I imagine that you are able to handle today, looking back when you were 19, 20 probably wouldn't have been able to at that point in time.
That's right. I've definitely learned, and that's why I do say it's a muscle. And you used one of my favorite words, which is intention.
Uh-huh.
Be incredibly intentional about the actions we take, and even the thoughts. I'm not one of those who needs a vision board in front of me, but for some people that works. But
Yeah,
instead, really intentional around being reflective about myself, about the thoughts and actions and feelings that I have.
yeah, okay. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the businesses, that side of things that you have helped to create and been a part of and grow. Could you share some of those experiences and what you have done?
Yeah, so I shared the first one, which was I
Yep.
bought the casting agency. The second was that it was just a passion, a hobby for me.
Yeah.
I loved the natural bath and body works. And
Okay.
I learned how to make soap. It's not actually
Okay.
as difficult as some might think, but it expanded dramatically into a sort of a full line. But you don't make a
Yeah.
single bar of soap, you make a loaf and,
Right.
10 bars. So I created gift
Yep.
baskets that were so popular, I turned that into a whole business. I got
Okay.
the whole family involved in it, and
Hmm.
at some point, it just grew to a point where I couldn't sustain it, so I sold the
Yeah.
business.
Okay.
I've been very, very involved, particularly in female-led founders, so investing and
Yeah.
supporting female founders, because only 4% of venture capital funding goes to women.
Okay.
Um, and then a number of years ago, I bought a data and analytics company. But what's really interesting is these side hustle. I've always loved the buy and sell kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
almost always off the side of my desk, I've been buying and selling things. When I'm done with it, sometimes I'll donate, but
Yep.
otherwise, if I believe there's a value in it, I sell it. I did
Yep.
that, and I learned in the early days of buying direct from offshore locations,
Hmm.
pre-DH gate and those kind of things, the value, in North America. So I did that in 1 year, literally as just kind of a side project, like
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I cleared $50,000.
Oh,
Like that
wow.
was my net profit for that, like
Yeah.
really working too hard. And I use that to invest in, like, as part of a cash purchase for another business. So I'm
Yeah.
always doing something like that, Zach,
Right.
quite honestly. And then even on, some of the boards I sit in, I'm, an investor in some of those as well.
Yeah, yep. Wow, and that's impressive. Just something that you can take and find products that you can purchase offshore for a lower cost, and then just selling. And just as an example of that, for something you were doing on the side, clearing $50,000 net profit, just because it was something you could do, and that's very impressive. And I wanted to go back to, you mentioned a statement that only about 4% of venture capital goes to women-owned businesses. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a multitude of reasons for that.
Okay.
The biggest one is and it's related to, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, but
Yeah.
it's that who you know. And so you think around traditionally where a
Hmm.
lot of the funding comes from. You look at private equity, you look at venture capital, the managing partners, majority of them are men. And so it tends to be
Hmm.
all about network and who you're connected with.
Okay.
So when I talk about diversity and inclusion, actually I have another phrase aligned to one you,
Hmm.
strategically intentional. And so I think for women, they weren't networked and connected into the right places. I also
Yep.
find many women, there's data that shows that women typically, and this is about in the corporate world, not entrepreneurship, but they don't apply for
Yeah.
jobs or roles if they don't believe they meet all of the criteria, like 9 or 10
Okay.
out of the 10. Men,
Hmm.
men will do that with only 6.
Okay.
And so there's this need to, I'm not going to say drive for perfection,
Hmm.
but I think there's a little bit of an underlying sort of fear and or worry around rejection. And then there's a
Okay.
whole bunch of other reasons that, sort of I think are very, very systemic. And I'm hoping to see
Yeah.
that change. But the biggest ones being around the networking and who's connected to whom, and being really, again, intentional about looking for diverse founders.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any type of networking or ways that this is continuing to shift towards change? Any ways that you are seeing that trend starting to move?
A ton. So actually, there was an
Okay.
organization that I was involved with. They rebranded recently. I probably
Yeah.
preferred the first name of CEO
Okay.
for entrepreneurs. They're now called Coreless, and this was
Okay.
an organization founded to essentially, donors or activators, they call them, contribute funding. And
Yep.
depending on which country in the world you're in, some places you get a tax receipt, sometimes you don't.
Hmm.
And that money goes into creates a pool to create interest-free loans, essentially, for female
Oh,
founders,
wow.
and they
Okay.
get some coaching and mentorship. There's a bunch of other like groups that have been created where, often women, but others are pooling money. So that's one. To
Yeah.
honestly now seeing it saddens me to some extent, Zach, that we have
Yeah.
to incent businesses and leaders to do the right thing. But you're seeing
Hmm.
more and more mandate for diversity on boards, et cetera. The NASDAQ and the
Sure.
S&P, for example, both require a certain, percentage of women on their boards or other
Yeah.
people, diverse
Yep.
diverse backgrounds.
Okay. Yeah. So there is a trend moving that direction, and it sounds like an organization. I prefer the name CEO too. I like the sounds of that, but Corliss is doing some work in that regard as well, as I'm sure others too. But yeah, it's just something that I haven't really thought about, and I can see where you're saying that the networking of individuals, and if it's predominantly men in these positions on these boards or in these venture capital firms, and their network are predominantly men, if that's the case, then there's likelihood that they are the ones that are going to get the capital. Or if the
That's
women
right.
aren't pursuing something that they're not 90 or 100% certain that they will meet the criteria for, then the person who's going after it 60% criteria, but they're the ones going after it, then I can see where that also could lead to the other person getting that capital for their business. But I do like to hear that increased effort is being made to continue to grow the diversity of boards of organizations, and be able to create opportunities for women and other people from diverse backgrounds, like you had said. So, let me ask you two additional questions that I like to ask all of my guests. One of those being, if and when you are approached by someone who says, I'm really interested in getting involved in an entrepreneurship type endeavor, and I have an idea and I just don't know where to start. What type of tips do you provide to somebody who hasn't really had that experience before?
Well, I encourage them to ask for help,
Okay.
most certainly. But one of the things I pressure test with them is this notion of what's the if you're in business, they talk about TAM, total addressable
Yeah.
market, and that tends to be corporate speak as we're looking at, taking more market share, or or share of wallet is referred to. But I like for entrepreneurs to think about the total addressable problem. Like, are
Okay.
you creating products or services that solves a problem out there.
Yeah.
The challenge with that is there's not always data to support it, particularly when looking to raise capital, for that business. So think about it
Okay.
that way. I would also say, ideally, it be in a space that you're passionate about. I mean, being an entrepreneur is
Hmm.
can be quite difficult work. And if you're doing it
Right.
particularly after hours till it grows, I mean, you have to love it. I kind of have that
Yep.
80/20 rule. And the next would be not to do everything by themselves. So when I say asking for help, it's not only in terms of how to get started, but
Yeah.
recognize what your superpower is. And you're the idea generator, and there might be elements of the business that you're really great at, but
Yep.
there's a whole bunch I can assure you that you're not. And so
Yes.
find people to partner, whether that's finance or it's marketing or it's other parts of the business,
Yeah.
and then reach out. I mean, there's groups like on EO which is an entrepreneur organization for other
Yeah.
entrepreneurs who can help you on that journey. So find people who've done it before and can support you.
Yeah, no, I like all of those answers. I think that I know in my own experience, especially with regards to having people come alongside and help, not just those that I'm mentored by, but also those that can come and do some of the roles and the tasks that they're just not in my wheelhouse or they're not as strong in my wheelhouse. And it is definitely something I've observed in myself, but I see in others too, where you just can't do everything. And if you're trying to, you're not going to be really as successful in that one or two or a few things that you're an expert in or that you excel in. So I do appreciate that. Uh, Second question, the $1 million question, something I like to ask everyone as well. If you're handed $1 million today with no restrictions on it, where would you put that? What would you do to invest that in your business or another endeavor you're interested
Oh, I probably would have immediately just said real estate, because that's
in?
one thing I
Okay.
didn't tell you. Like I bought my first house
Yeah.
at 19. I've done a ton of like real estate flips, so that's also been
Okay.
quite successful. Um,
Yeah.
so I do still think that's a safe place to be putting money.
Hmm.
However, with
Yep.
so much that's happening around generative AI, and
Hmm.
stuff, but I mean, so it could be a bit saturated. So I'm saying that, but I'm heavily involved in the tech world as well, and so I'm just
Yeah.
seeing there's some great places, to insert some of that technology,
Yeah.
into whether it's things like, like hiring. Like there's a great way to
Yeah.
find diverse talent or look for skills. Like I just think that you find kind of the niche and how to leverage that generative
Yeah.
AI into those spaces. I think that could be like currently that could be a sweet
Yeah.
spot.
Absolutely. Definitely makes sense to make use of that that's currently available and continuing to expand as well. The efficiencies created there. Well, really appreciate this conversation. Now, if anyone wants to find out more about what you're doing or about you and connect, what is the best way for someone to connect with you?
I have a personal website, which is
Okay.
victoria-peltier.com. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes, so no one needs
Yep.
to worry about figuring out how to spell that. And then from there, your listeners can figure out whether they want to, which social media platform they want to connect and engage with me on.
Okay. Excellent. That sounds great. Well, I definitely encourage anyone who is interested in hearing more and reading more to connect with Victoria on her social media channels and check out the website. We will include that in the show notes as well. So I want to thank you again for taking some time with me today. There's so much more that I'd love to ask if we had more time. You are a wealth of knowledge and experience. So I thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, there'll be a second time, hopefully in the future. All right. Take care.
Bye.